apologize for the sound. There's a lot of rain going on out there. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah. And this is Medicated Housewife DIY, where crafting and mental health come together. And this is Stassi, who does not like the rain. It is currently raining, so she will be joining me on my lap. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. In today's DIY video, we are making a Thanksgiving and holiday cornucopia out of Dollar Tree Tumbling Tower Blocks. Oh my God, they've been upside down the whole time. Out of Dollar Tree Tumbling Tower Blocks. You all seem to really like the wood bowls from our last couple of videos, but I think this one might blow you away. So grab your Dollar Tree Jenga blocks for this unbelievable Dollar Tree Jenga Block DIY. If you're not already excited, get excited. And let's go make some stuff and jump right into this. For our Dollar Tree DIY Tumbling Tower Block Cornucopia for fall Thanksgiving decor, to begin with, as a template, I used this bowl that I had. It's about 11 inches in diameter, placed it upside down, and I placed 13 Jenga blocks around the bowl, spaced out as evenly as possible. We're using the Dollar Tree Tumbling Tower Blocks and the Dollar Tree wood glue, which I have to say is a really strong hold. It makes this cornucopia super stable. I also use the instant coffee method again to stain my blocks to this nice warm brown color. I love that method, and some wood cubes from the Dollar Tree are there just to help me space out my first row. Those of you familiar with my hanging Jenga block bowl, and if you're not familiar, I will link the video in the description box below. The front part of our cornucopia is going to be very similar to the sides of this bowl. We'll be doing the front first, and it'll look very familiar if you've seen that video. So I've removed the template bowl and I'm straightening up my spacing a little bit. We'll be using these cubes just for spacing. They're not in the design. They are purely to help us space out our Jenga blocks. I removed the first cube and we're going to glue the first block of our second row over these two Jenga blocks of the first row. So our first row is 13 blocks around. Our second row is also going to be 13 blocks. They're glued directly over the first row. Then we're going to begin our third row, which is also 13 blocks, and they're going to be glued directly over the second row. So we're going to end up with 3 rows of 13 blocks glued straight above one another. Our fourth row is only 12 blocks, still placed directly above the third row, leaving the last space open. And this is now our middle top of our cornucopia. And I'm going to mark it off with a piece of tape to help keep the project centered and a little easier to plan out with the rest of my spacing. Now on the fifth row, I'm only going to be using 11 blocks. And this row is where we begin the staggering effect, where we're going to glue each block at the halfway mark of the block beneath it. And doing this, we're going to end up forming the bowl shape that we want for the front of our cornucopia. The sixth row is only using 10 blocks, and we're going to continue the staggering pattern, placing them about halfway down on the block beneath it, going toward the inside of the circle. Now, the seventh row is only going to be 9 blocks. We're going to continue the staggered effect that we've been doing. And in between, I use a small little brush to clean up some of the excess glue that accumulates on the edges, just because I don't want it to dry there. Now, future Sarah wants to interject and say that if you want your cornucopia to have more of that traditional cornucopia front, that is where the bottom is closer to the table and it looks like it's spilling over onto the table, rather than up higher and more bowl-like, like this one that I'm making here, then you would stop working on this side now. And this will be the front of your cornucopia the way that it is. It's more like the traditional. You would stop here and then just continue with the video when we flip this around to the other side. But if you are doing it the way that I did, you will continue working on this front side along with me. So now if you're choosing to continue onto the rest of this side, you're going to be doing the 8th row now. In the 8th row, which is 8 blocks, they're going to be glued toward the inner circle, and we're just continuing our stagger with this 8th row. Our 9th row has 7 blocks, also staggered. Our 10th row, no surprise here, has 6 blocks that are staggered. Our 11th row is 5 blocks and staggered. And this is where I decided to end this front side of my cornucopia. At this point, you're going to need to let this project fully dry before continuing, or if not, what happens to me here with pieces falling will happen to you. You're going to need to re-glue things like I just did, and that's not fun. I left this overnight to dry so that we could continue safely. So the next morning we are fully dry and we flip the project over. You're going to want to rest the back on something for support so that we don't put any pressure on the front of our cornucopia while we are working on the back. Now this is technically the middle of the cornucopia. It has 3 rows of 13 blocks glued straight on top of one another. So when we start this side, we are technically starting on the 4th row. So this is where the cornucopia project becomes a giant leap of faith. Since I know how I want the back to look, it needs to taper in down to a point at the end, but it also needs to curve down toward the bottom and then curve back up again at the small tapered end. I was visualizing a whale tail, or you can visualize a horn, as in horn of plenty, which is the Latin translation of cornucopia. I'm pretty sure. Just thought I'd include some harvest and Thanksgiving trivia for you. You're welcome. But just keep in mind, I was figuring this out as I went along. But for our first row here, which is really row number 4, because the middle has 3 rows of 13, the 4th row will also have 13 blocks, but we are beginning to glue them down on an angle. And to begin with, this angle needs to start curving downward from the top, while the bottom needs to begin curving downward too to start the tapering and to follow the curve of the top, if that makes any sense. Hopefully by watching it, you can get a sense of what I mean. So my first few blocks at the top are glued onto the blocks beneath them, starting about halfway down the width of the bottom blocks. The side blocks kind of stay the same on top of each other because I don't want the cornucopia to have a really fat middle, so I kind of leave them in the same place that the blocks beneath them are. And then the bottom blocks are going to be glued about halfway down the blocks that are beneath them. The 5th row is also 13 blocks, but instead of angling these, I glue these directly on top of the 4th row, because I also want to give the back of the cornucopia some length, which I can't do if each row is constantly angling inward. Then I'll end up with a really short-tailed cornucopia. The sixth row is also 13 blocks and also glued straight down to the blocks beneath it to help make this cornucopia longer, which is part of the reason why this project is so huge in the end. This thing is massive. It's a beast. It is a force to be reckoned with, but I felt it needed the length, so here we go. The seventh row is still 13 blocks, but they are now glued on an angle, pointing downward again to continue the downward curve. You can see I try positioning them in different ways before I glue them, but I'm just flying by the seat of my pants here. The eighth row is still 13 blocks, but these are glued directly above the angled ones, again, for length. So on the ninth row now, I pick up the cornucopia. I try to get a better sense of what route to take in trying to continue my curve, while simultaneously tapering the end of the whale, which I should more accurately refer to as a horn, as in horn of plenty. So I look at it and I decide that I do one last row of 13 angled before I start thinking about tapering off my blocks. So now row 9 is 13 blocks angled down at the top and then angled inward at the bottom. The 10th row is our last row of 13, I promise, and these are glued straight on top of the row beneath them. 11th row, we're going to taper down to 12 blocks. So keep in mind I had to get a little creative in my placement in order to only glue down 12 blocks in a space designed for 13 blocks. But I knew the tapering had to begin, so I had to do my best, and I tried to space out the 12 blocks on top of 13 the best way that I could. I also had to simultaneously begin the tapering in of the cornucopia body. So this 11th row has 12 blocks all angling in toward the center of the circle. The 12th row is 11 blocks straight onto the blocks beneath it because apparently I am going for the Guinness Book of World Records in largest Jenga block cornucopia. I'm not even kidding. This is a beast. So in the interest of time, I'm going to speed this up for you. The 13th row is 10 blocks angled into a taper. 14th row is 10 straight. 15th row is 9 blocks angled. 16th row is 9 blocks straight. 17th row is 8 blocks angled. 18th row is 8 blocks straight. 19th row is 7 blocks angled. 20th row is 7 blocks straight. 21 is 6 blocks angled in, and 22 is 6 blocks straight. Row 23 is 5 blocks, but at this point we need the tapered part of our horn or cornucopia to start pointing upwards. So the way to do that is to start gluing these 5 blocks up toward the sky on the top, then slightly inward on the sides to make this a little smaller, and then toward the middle of the circle on the bottom again to help make it smaller. Speeding this up again, row 24 is 5 blocks glued directly onto the blocks beneath. Row 25 is 5 blocks glued slightly on an inward angle on the side and upward angle on the top. Row 26 is the same as 25 with 5 blocks on an inward angle on the sides, bottom, and upward angle on the top. Row 27 is 4 blocks glued on an upward angle on top and inward on the sides and bottom. Row 28 is also 4 blocks, all glued in an upward angle. Now I lost the original footage, but the next row is 3 blocks, then another 3, and then 2, and then another 2, and they're all pretty much angled inward as much as possible. I also added to my tail to make it pointier, and I did that with 4 blocks to make sort of a cone shape. I did 2 blocks on top of 1 block in sort of a angled formation like that, and then they were angled like that, like you're seeing here, and then I took the 4th block and I glued that on top of them. So in the end, it ends up looking a little bit like a cone, if you can see what I'm trying to explain. And I glued a cube onto the end of my horn at the tapered end, and then I put that over it and glued it, and it made it a little pointier. It worked. And this is how my Dollar Tree DIY Tumbling Tower Block Cornucopia came out. Oh my gosh, you guys. This is kind of cool, right? This is for sure a great addition to your fall and Thanksgiving decor. Is it perfect? No. I mean, is it a perfect Horn of Plenty shape? No. Does it slightly resemble a goldfish cracker? A little bit. But it is truly unique. Heads will definitely turn if you make this DIY. And the sheer size of this vessel alone makes it quite the statement piece. Let me know in the comments what you think of this project. Was I too ambitious, or do you think I've got a winner here? All I can tell you is that this baby is going to be on my Thanksgiving table this year and possibly for years to come. I hope you enjoyed this Medicated Housewife DIY, and if you'd like to see more DIYs, hit the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Medicated Housewife, and crafting is my medication.